Can you see that? Wonderful. I want to talk to you tonight about Middlemarch, but I can't do two books tonight. However, we cannot ignore reading Franzen's Crossroad without understanding context. And there's a lot of Middlemarch going on here. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the book by George Eliot, and if you have not yet, then you have a wonderful experience ahead of you. But make no mistakes here. This is a novel written in 2021. This is Franzen's sixth novel. And what is included in the pages of this book is a family saga set during the 1970s, centering on the Hildebrandt family in the small fictional town of New Prospect, Illinois. And something tells me that it's probably as cold in this fictional New Prospect as it is in my Jacksonville backyard. This book examines the existential distress of a disintegrating household. It takes the religious beliefs of its characters seriously without ever forgetting how easily faith can twist itself into absurdity. Middle. Everything about the Hildebrandts is middle.
Ellen, how do I get on?
And middle-esque. We have unprosperous members of this white middle class living in a suburb of Chicago in the 70s. Each chapter of the book is told from a different point of view of the Hildebrandt family. And each of the Hildebrandts struggle with three themes: how to be good, how to figure out their relationship with Christianity, and how to justify their Faustian dark bargain in seeking these answers. I want you to meet Russ and Marian Hildebrandt. I got this photo. This is a photo of common use, so it's just kind of out there. I don't know who posted it. But anyways, this is who I imagine Russ and Marian Hildebrandt, whose marriage is close to collapse. They have 4 children: Clem, Becky, Perry, and Judson. The first section of the book opens up in its advent, taking place in the winter of 1971. Russ is an associate pastor at First Reformed Church. We find him flirting with a young widow, Frances Cottrell, and stewing over his rivalry with the charismatic youth pastor, Rick Ambrose. Russ has been forced out of Crossroads' popular youth group as its leader and is quite jealous of rock and roll Rick. There's a pivotal scene in the book where I could explain it like a joke. A rabbi, a preacher, and a very drunk teenager walk into a Christmas party. And this drunk drunk teenager / drug dealer is one of my favorite characters, Perry, 15-year-old son of Russ Hildebrandt. And Perry is a preacher's kid. He's famously, fought with that identity that some people have of trying to be good, trying to be good enough, try to meet the expectations, and then defiantly being bad as any teenager would be. He's brilliant yet troubled. And lately we meet him when he has resolved to quit drugs, be nicer to his sister, and generally become a better person. But is finding goodness difficult? This finding of goodness is difficult for Perry to comprehend. And he's stranded between two options. And this is where we find him at the annual interfaith party. He is buzzed up on Glog, and he strikes up a conversation with a rabbi and a pastor about a question that is much on his mind and speaks to the crux of the book. Can an action be considered good if the person acting knows that by being good, he will gain pleasure or advantage? Is a godly man truly good if he enjoys being righteous? Is Perry himself good if he can't stop busying his mind from tallying up the ancillary benefits of doing the right thing? He says, and he gets very frustrated when he's drunk at the party. He says, no matter what I do, it's always me who's in the wrong. He's drunk, he's desperate, he's ashamed, he bursts into tears and into an only apology available to him as his buzz begins to decrease, saying, I'm doing the best that I can. Both Perry and his sister Becky have joined Crossroads. Precocious Perry has resolved to stop dealing pot and become a better person. Becky is our popular cheerleader figure, and she mistrusts Perry. She also comes to inherit $13,000 from one of my favorite characters who I would love to hear more from, and that was her Aunt Shirley. Initially, she attends Crossroads at the urging of the very cool Tanner Evans, the bell-bottom dreamboat rock star, aspiring musician in her youth group. But ultimately, she has a very interesting religious awakening of her own. And then there's Clem, the eldest brother, who has his sexual awakening with his college girlfriend, Sharon, and decides to end his relationship, drop out of school, and forfeit his draft referral in order to fight Vietnam. Meanwhile, the amazing Marian is surreptitiously attending therapy sessions at which she recounts traumatic episodes from her past, including an affair with a married man, a psychotic break, and a pregnancy gone wrong. These episodes take place in Los Angeles shortly before she meets Russ, and she's hidden them from her family. And despite all of this, she has much love and concern for her son, Perry, because she sees a lot of her instability in him. Lastly, there's Judson. I would argue the judge, or our author, Jonathan. We don't hear too much from him in this particular story, but this is the first in a trilogy. Then we have Easter, spring of 72, an annual service trip to Arizona as planned that we all know is not going to go well. Russ has been on the Navajo community dating back to his alternative service days in Arizona as a conscientious objector to World War II. He's a chaperone, and wouldn't you know it, Frances has come along for the trip. Meanwhile, Marian is on vacation in California, ostensibly taking Judson to Disneyland, but actually meeting her own flame. And that flame goes out pretty flat. Meanwhile, Perry on the trip has developed a huge cocaine addiction, and we know that does not bode well. The entire thing ends in an apocalyptic fire, and then we fast forward to summer. Becky and Tanner have now taken a trip to Europe, where our cheerleader who has fallen from grace has found God at the altar, high as a kite, decides to leave town, go with Tanner to Europe, and she becomes pregnant. She comes back to New Prospect, living with Tanner and now her new daughter, Grace. And she's estranged from her parents. Now, Russ and Marian have grown, I would argue, weirdly closer because they're now both focused back on their own relationship with their taking care of their son, Perry, who is recuperating in a psych hospital and getting electroshock therapy. Becky has also fallen out with her older brother, Clem, who she was very close to. Clem is sent away by the draft board. He kind of misses the boat to go to Vietnam. And we find him kind of like a Voltaire or something, or in Candide. He's kind of roaming around Peru, poverty level, doing manual labor and contemplating life. The book ends when Clem returns to New Prospect and he reunites with Becky. But like I said, this book is a nod to Middlemarch. What we've read is the beginning of a trilogy. And even on the back of the book, we know that this is going to be a social commentary. Our novelist, on the back of the book, it says that Crossroads is the first volume of a trilogy, a key to all mythologies that will span 3 generations and trace the inner life of our culture through present day. The key to mythologies, we all have one. And here it is displayed on the screen with George Eliot's masterpiece, Middlemarch. We see the character here, Edward Casabon. He is what I would call a failure to launch author of his own book, which he tried so desperately to write, called A Key to All Mythologies. He wanted to unlock all the answers of life. And of course, our Dorothea Brooke is married to him, and she's trying so desperately hard to get him to write his novel just stand at the head of the class when it comes to the intellects of the time. Edward fails. He dies before the book is ever written. But this is an Easter egg for the theme of our book and for all who love Eliot. Franzen intends this trilogy to, quote, span 3 generations and trace the inner life to present day using the Hildebrandt family. Crossroads can be read as if it were Middlemarch, which basically is a book that I would call a patent place taking place in the early 1800s. There's a whole lot of world of drama going on in the most middle average places, just like in New Prospect. It refers to the way people were, even in Middlemarch, Eliot refers to the way people use religion or whatever set of beliefs to justify their actions, justify their choices, measure their own self-worth, and make sense of existence. These are the mythologies of Middlemarch. These are the mythologies that our characters use in order to cope with reality. And Franzen says that he is fascinated by mythologies, which he refers to as irrational beliefs. He believes everything we think and do is irrational. Russ, our patriarch, is consigned to what his drug-addled teenager son calls the crappier parsonage, a building more in need of razzing than renovation. And it seems we could even say the same of Russ's character. He has a type of weird narcissistic self-loathing. And while listening to Robert Johnson's Crossroads Blues, Russell tells himself that he too is an outsider, a later day parasite and a fraud. Outwardly, he's virtuous. Inwardly, he's self-pitying. He's progressive in his principles, but he's regressive in his own practices. When he sees Frances in her own home, a reality hits him. Franzen says, an unsettling, strong hit of her reality, her independence as a woman, her thinking of thoughts and making choices wholly unrelated to him. Here is a man who goes around thinking that the whole world revolves around him, and he is stunned when he sees Frances operating on her own without him being the sun and she nothing but the planets. And because he's in this business of penitence, Russell cannot avoid the certainty that he is a sinner, but he is also so self-congratulatory that he finds a way to savor his moral decay, his willingness to sleep with Frances, even though he's married. He's like a worm withering in the mud. He luxuriates in his guilt, saying, the feeling of homecoming of his humiliations, this was how he knew God existed. Crazy. Now, as far as Marian is concerned, I loved her. I thought she was an incredible character. And the scenes with Marian and her husband in the kitchen, to me, struck of iconic American novel storytelling. Amazing things happen in the kitchen when it comes to our storytelling. Immediately, my mind went to the amazing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. When, well, in this case, we have Elizabeth Taylor playing the lead character, walking in and looking at her husband's failed life as a professor and grabbing a chicken wing out of the fridge, munching it, and just looking around and saying, "What a dump." This whole idea of their marriage being a sham, their life being a sham, is beautifully and painfully unfolding within Jonathan Franzen's wonderful writing. I also thought of The Corrections, his earlier book, where there's a lot of falling apart at the kitchen table. August Osage County, even Inherit the Wind. But just to balance things out and let you know that I don't think everything negative happens at the American kitchen table, there's a beautiful story by Truman Capote called A Christmas Story. And there is magic that happens in that kitchen. And let's not also forget our beautiful Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird running in and out of the house. Lurking inside Marian is a lie that festers. This lie is the conviction that she is fundamentally a bad person, one who deserves forgiveness from neither her husband or God. I found Marian fascinating and painful. And on page 129, she says, "For Catholic, guilt was more than just a feeling. It was the inescapable consequence of sin. It was an objective thing, plainly visible to God. He had seen her, God, eat 6 sugar cookies, and the name of her sin was gluttony." That is a horrible, to use a pun or, a metaphor. That is an amazing cross to bear. We get a lot of time to be a fly on the wall in her therapist's office, and we learn a lot about her past. And this is a beautiful device that the author uses to learn an entirely different backstory about Marian by sitting there in the therapist's office with her. So much was resonating, so much was real. At one point, she talks about her depression and says she felt trapped in a metal cube that was filling up with water, leaving only a tiny pocket of air at the top to breathe. The air was sanity. She also thinks that she is responsible for the terrible things that happened to her, even though the therapist continues to ask her to forgive herself and be angry at the perpetrators instead. But Marian disagrees, and she says things like, "I know you think it's sick to blame myself, but spiritually, I think it's healthier." I found this incredibly painful and disturbing. And when we get to the discussion, please let's put a pin and come back to this, because I need to unpack that. I don't know what to do with that. One reviewer said that Marian cackles with humanity. She, to me, is the most memorable Hildebrandt, arguably one of the most vivid of all of Franzen's creations. She is someone who Russ relies on to write her sermons. She becomes eventually depressed and filled with rage toward him, toward her. And she says at one point, it almost reminds me of Patricia Highsmith. She was remembering how it felt to want to murder someone. she thought, maybe yet I'll become a women's libber. Like she's just so grasping at any straw to hold on. And eventually we watch her just light up a cigarette. And for several more pages, she becomes basically a chimney. We have our Hildebrandt children, Perry, who I discussed with you. And I'd like to know what you think about his decline and the choices he made. And do you know, or did you know young people like this? And what you think of Becky's evolution from that perfect student and popular cheerleader. And then there's Clem, who sees everything his dad does as a failure. Moving on, and then I'll wrap with the inspiration, themes, and ideas for this book. Oh, I want to let you know what Hildebrandt meant, because I'm always interested in names. So Hildebrandt is a German name, Hild for fight, and Brand or Brandt for fire. So here is a clue for us that this book has to do with, fighting for good or fighting good. I don't know. This is another theme of the book, goodness. The ideas of the novel, we'll get to goodness in a minute, but I'll just leave the slide there for now. This is a book that is a novel of ideas about inadequacy of ideas. Okay, a novel of ideas about the inadequacy of ideas. The characters are more than mouthpieces, and it is a book full of people thinking, and sometimes, they could all, take the advice to get out of their own way because they're getting their own selves in trouble. Religion plays an incredibly important role in this book. We have Crossroads. We have our main character, Russ, who had a Mennonite background. And this book was inspired by someone that Franzen met, who also, like Russ, had a Mennonite background. And also Franzen, as a teenager, belonged to a youth group, and it was called Fellowship, and it had a big effect on him. He said that the public display of emotion produced overwhelming approval. He says he approaches his book and his themes as an emotional experience. He said, it was not my conscious intention, but I think I produced a book that essentially has no theology in it. And think about it. This is a book about people who are each struggling with their faith, but it is not a book that preaches any type of theology. It is a historical collision between liberal Protestantism and secularism. We have Paul Robeson, who in 1952 came to the church to speak in the book. Yet, if we go where the youth group is and check out the walls of the lounge, what do we see there? There are quotes. By whom? E.E. Cummings, John Lennon, Bob Dylan, and wouldn't you know, even Jesus. So this is a battle between family and a battle between religion and the counterculture and the changing tide in America. And let me just see if I can pull one more quote about goodness, because it is such a huge theme in the book. And we have Perry at about page, almost halfway through the book, where he begins a chapter saying, resolved, that goodness is an inverse function of intelligence. So he gets to a point where he realized, maybe it's a sham. The Hildebrandt family occupies a milieu, a church-going, suburban, Midwestern family in which worth is measured according to all the important niceness and goodness on a spectrum. And this is what Perry fears, that there may be no substance or logic behind the niceness. This family, and taken together, all of Franzen's novels amount to one long elaboration of a theme that we may find back from Tolstoy. Unhappy families are all unhappy in their own ways. But isn't this also every family? Franzen's analysis of the American family and the characters, we have a kid not living up to his potential. We've got a woman unhappy with her weight. We have a teenager who has a crush and has gone over the edge. And then we have a son who really is not interested in finishing college, even though he's this close. And he ends up going to New Orleans and working at a KFC. And although some of these things may seem banal, they're all tied to an existential question on why. Why are they making these choices? Which brings us to the title. On the left, you'll see an image, a photograph of Robert Johnson, the blues guitar player. He was a talented guitarist from Mississippi, famous for the supposed deal with the devil that he made at the crossroads of Highway 49 and 61, that you'll see a sign there commemorating this on the right. The legend was that he was less than a talented musician. And then Johnson made a plea with the devil one night that if he could become that he would become a famous musician. So he went from playing small dives to recording albums and becoming the inspiration for people like Eric Clapton and bands like the Rolling Stones. Very little is known about Johnson's short life, except this plea that he made, and he speaks about this deal he made with the devil in his famous song, Crossroads. But he died at age 27 when he was poisoned by a man whose girlfriend Johnson was having an affair with. But his music and myth still today have enduring theme. The title of the book is a nod to it, as well as our character Russ wanting to share his crossroads, his Faustian, deal with the devil. With who? With Frances. From a cultural context, this book is showing the generational fraying of the 1960s and 1970s. We have Marian, the product of someone who kind of missed the boat when it came to women's lib. We have Rick, who is trying to hold on to his mainstream Protestant upbringing. And then we have Frances we have Rick, who is not the mainstream Protestant type, but the new hip, he's representing the evangelical, non-traditional ways to worship. And then we have Frances in Russ, who clumsily try to reach out to the Black community and fail. Finally, there's a lot of 18th and 19th century themes in this book, because Franzen is interested in the oldest preoccupation with literature, and that is why people perceive themselves as good or why they see themselves as bad and why they do terrible things. Classics are full of Dorothea Brooks, Will Lanislavs, who strike out on these ethical odysseys as seen in Middlemarch. We even have Madame Bovary, which was scandalous at the time because Flaubert did not condemn her. The themes that we experienced in Crossroads can also be found in Austen and Dickens. In Making Goodness, one of the major themes of this novel, Franzen is far from alone. And since the rise of the novel and the idea of this type of novel in the 18th centuries, novelists continue to explore how to live morally, how to live a good life. But the contemporary novelist like Franzen addresses moral issues a lot differently. But what this book does what this book allows us to do and what novels do today that's becoming more and more rare is talking about a book like Crossroads allows us to have civil discourse and a back and forth mode of communication while respecting one another. And that's becoming more and more rare. So now as we go to discussion, I just want to say that the crossroads that we share coming together each month to talk about books is becoming more and more precious every day.